So good evening. Welcome to SEEP. Welcome to this meeting of the Climate and Environment Emergency Executive Panel. I am Councillor Champion, Chair of the Climate Environment Emergency Executive Panel. It's a tongue twister for you. I will be chairing the meeting. To begin, there's a few matters of housekeeping. In the event of emergency, there is no practice alarms planned for this meeting, so if there is an alarm sounding, please evacuate City Hall by going down to the main staircase, out to the War Memorial in front of City Hall. Please, would speakers use your microphones at all time when speaking directly and speak directly into the microphone. Please mute the microphones when not speaking. The meeting is being live streamed on the Council's YouTube channel. Members of the committee using electronic devices to access their meeting papers, and visitors are welcome to use mobile phones and other devices, including cameras, but please use them discreetly, set them to silent, and do not use voice or camera flash functions. I don't believe that we have any apologies noted. Do we have any declarations of interest, please? I'll take that as a resounding no. The minutes from the last meeting held on the 7th of October are before the committee for confirmation. Are there any points of accuracy that need to be raised? As there's no points raised, can I have a proposer and a seconder to... thank you, Councillor Laws, Councillor Bolton. So that's our minutes approved. And now we can get on to the more exciting element, which is handing over to Phil Hunt for our general update. Thank you, Phil.
Thank you. And with your permission, Chair, we have decided to change the format of the SEEP meeting just a little bit. We normally go through an extensive report, and thank you for your attention while we've done that in the past, but Nicholas Austin, our new Exec Director, has suggested that we bring more colour, more pictures and kind of more engaging material, and we've been really happy to do that. So we've got more images for you today. We've also have our Biodiversity Strategy Officer, Jane Wilkinson, joining us to take you through one of those elements, the kind of nature recovery part of the presentation. And we have Hannah Wooler from Matter of Place Architects, who's leading the kind of technical drive in the retrofitting of our social housing to take us through some elements around that. So a little bit more, not just a Christmassy thing, but you know, we'll be doing this more regularly. So we shall kick off. James, I think you're doing the controls.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you. So first off, we thought we would just go through some highlights from the SEEP report, as it were. You'll have noticed this time we've added an executive summary, so it's a bit more detailed, just going through those points really. But just to sort of start us off, here is the way that we see this presentation panning out. So we'll have 20 minutes from myself and Phil on sort of key highlights from the report. We'll then have that presentation by Hannah from Matter of Fact Retrofit, half an hour from Jane on biodiversity projects, and then Phil is going to provide a bit of an update about citywide low carbon heat networks. So to start us off on some of the key highlights from the SEEP report, this is probably relevant for Phil to come in here as well, but the first thing is to make you aware that we are further to some consultation that we did with you towards the end of last year. We now have a finalised version of the Climate Responsive Norwich programme that we are proposing to take to Cabinet in January for adoption. So thank you for all of your comments previously on that. Those have been integrated into a version that we now look to adopt, essentially. Phil, do you have anything else to say on that other than?
No, just to say that following the council's publishing of our We Are Norwich community-led plan, it set out a climate responsive Norwich as one of 5 priorities. And this document sets out how we will achieve that priority, essentially. So yes, we've consulted on it pretty widely, public, a number of kind of expert consultees, the Climate Commission, Norwich Society, UEA, and a number of anchor institutions around the city have contributed, and we're now ready to publish it. So we're hoping, all going to plan, that ends up at Cabinet on January the 14th for adoption.
And we should say, which we probably neglected to say, this is because our current environmental strategy 2020 to 2025 is coming to the end of its natural lifetime. And the climate response in Norwich sort of serves as an overarching umbrella document from which future strategies will also come forward. So that's fine. Yeah, on to the next thing. So next sort of highlight from the SEEP report is, we'll have more detail on this later under the section that Phil will go through, but we've been fortunate to win a further 75k from the Heat Network Delivery Unit to essentially progress planning around the citywide heat network. So we previously had with our consultants, Fairheat, completed a techno-economic feasibility study, which showed very good potential in the city for heat networks, which could essentially serve to decarbonise a lot of heating in the city. But we're now looking to essentially progress it to what's called detailed project development stage. And this funding will essentially allow that to happen. I don't know whether you want to speak here, Phil, a little bit about stuff with the major projects team that you're doing.
Just a little addition. So there we go. Heat Network Delivery Unit have been kind enough to grant us £75,000. We're matching that with £75,000 of the council's own funding to create a total fund of 150. And this funding will be used to get into the next level of detail of understanding about the citywide low carbon heat network, and particularly the output of it is to develop an investment prospectus with which we can encourage investors, developers and operators of heat networks to the city to invest. But I've got a reasonably sort of deep dive into this later on in this presentation, so I'll probably come back to that then, if that's okay.
Fine, thank you. There is a consultation process currently taking place around a supplementary planning document for what's called Policy 2 Sustainable Communities of the Greater Norwich Local Plan. So the Greater Norwich Local Plan was adopted in March 2024. This policy is in theory already guiding planning decisions for major developments. And basically what the policy says is that applicants have to provide a sustainability statement with their application that shows how the development will contribute to sustainable development that sort of aligns to climate change and environment requirements. And the purpose of the SPD really is to provide additional guidance for both applicants and planners about what should be included in those sustainability statements, how they should be written, what they should address, and will hopefully help to allow compliance with that policy of the plan. So the consultation, should you wish to look at the documents and make any comments, is open until Friday the 19th of December, so a couple of weeks from today. And I think hopefully that's all relatively straightforward. But yeah, essentially that policy guides how developments can meet climate change and environmental requirements, things like avoiding combustion technologies for heating, and having renewable alternatives. And then moving on to the next item. So we've also been fortunate further to 4.7 million that we previously won earlier this year under the Warm Homes Local Grant, which is a private sector home energy efficiency scheme. We've recently been fortunate to win an additional 759,000. So this has essentially been reallocated from other councils to Norwich City Council. We expressed that we had capacity essentially to deliver beyond the 4.7 that we were originally granted. And so we've been given some additional funding, which we think should deliver about an additional 30 dwellings this financial year. And that scheme's progressing well. We've had really strong uptake. I think we are now fully subscribed for this financial year, but members of the public and landlords can still apply. If they're interested in energy efficiency improvements on private sector homes, can still apply for the next 2 financial years. And yeah, there's a couple of images there of some works that have taken place in the past, just to kind of give an idea of on the ground what this delivery ends up looking like. Next sort of highlights here is we recently may have seen the council completed installation of solar panels and a heat pump system at the Eaton Park changing rooms. So this is on the southwest quarter of sort of the pavilion there. And in total, it's 29 kilowatt peak of solar capacity, which essentially means when it's under optimal conditions, it will be producing 29 kilowatt hours, kilowatts over the course of an hour. And expected annual generation is 28,000 kilowatt hours, and it is now working. And it's also got some battery storage systems installed, 50 kilowatt hours of storage capacity. And there was a launch event held on the 18th of November with some councillors in attendance, as you can see in the photo there. And yeah, just a great example really of how we're sort of continuing to look at opportunities for renewables as projects come up. Sorry.
Got a little anecdote around this one, if I may. So when probably about a year and a half ago, this project came onto our radar, a mechanical and electrical consultant had been appointed to design the new heating system. And this is an example of one of your early sort of transition buildings. And we asked the M&E consultant, as we call them, to do us a fully renewable heating solution. And they came back with a design, just said, you can't do it. You've not enough space. You've got to have gas boilers. It's okay. So we came up with a little ruse that we asked them, we said, let's do a little thought experiment. If in 5 years' time, we didn't have gas, or, we were much further down the road in transitioning away from gas, in the future, how would you design it for that scenario? And they said, well, like this, and could provide a complete heat pump solution. And we said, great, then let's do that right now. And that kind of worked. And that's an example of how we sort of overcome barriers and change the way our supply chain thinks to kind of meet this new requirement for moving away from gas. And it's worked really successfully there.
Great, thank you. Moving on to the next thing on the list. So we're part of the Norfolk Climate Change Partnership, which is essentially all of the local authority sustainability departments coming together to sort of share knowledge and best practice. We recently, following the conclusion of the Net Zero Communities project, which we sort of ran over the last couple of years as a partnership, which engaged with various communities around Norfolk, we've now been ordered an additional bit of funding from Innovate UK to essentially develop a retrofit advice website targeted at Norfolk residents. So the idea with this is really to sort of develop some case studies around works that have been delivered to households through things like grant schemes, as well as examples of people who've sort of gone off their own backs just to sort of fund home energy retrofits, and to just try and create a bit more of a story really around retrofit in Norfolk and hopefully demystify it a little bit. And the funding is quite a short-term funded project, so it's to be delivered by March 26, but it's all on track to do so. And yeah, looking positive. Councillor Bolton, I think you maybe had a question here?
Yeah, thanks. There are many of these device websites that exist. What will make it specific to Norwich and or Norfolk residents? And how will it be specifically tailored to that housing stock? And how is it going to move the client on to the next steps of actually getting quotes and getting these implemented? Because I know a lot of them just exist in a sphere of you could do this and then leave them there. So how's this going to be better?
I think it's very much going to be heavy on the case study element, so very much sort of showing households like theirs, people like them in this area who have had works done. So we're very much sort of one of the taglines that we've given as part of the choosing the contractor to design the website is content is key here really, and essentially we really want to make sure there are strong links through to grant schemes such as Norfolk Warm Homes are delivering, to really try and take that next step from okay, here's the information and here's the support that is available in your area for these schemes. So that's kind of will be embedded throughout the platform design really. Do you want to add anything else?
I think also a lot of local authorities have gone down the road of what you might call a one-stop shop platform, whereby you have a single organisation or a supply chain sitting behind the website, which purport to be able to take you through all of the steps. But you're absolutely right. A lot of people get very much stuck at the survey stage and tend not to progress on. And what we've found through the research that we did in the previous project that informed this, which was the Norwich Net Zero Communities project, was that one of the barriers there is trust. That people using those one-stop shops just simply don't know who sits behind it. They don't know who the contractors are. And so we haven't taken that approach quite purposefully. And we're very much working with kind of local content, success stories of people who have managed to transition through the kind of process of retrofitting, and keeping it quite supply chain agnostic at this stage. So, we recognize that there's a real barrier. We've done a lot of research to understand what it is, and the design of this website, does address what we see as the barriers, but let's see how we get on with it and see if that kind of comes through. But we're pretty confident that we've got it designed and targeted right. Trust is key.
Councillor Padder.
Thank you. A similar question, actually. You might have covered elements of it. So for that 150k Innovate UK funding, what kind of impact are they looking for? Are they looking for a behaviour change, or like a glossy website, or what kind of stuff are they looking for? Thank you.
Yes, well, I think essentially, the way Innovate UK work is to explore all manner of different solutions. So I think they liked the work that had been done under the Net Zero Communities in terms of deep engagement with communities and identifying what the barriers were, and they're interested to see how that can then feed into informing the design of a retrofit advice platform, aiming to really take the lessons that were learned from that in terms of how you speak to residents. There'll very much be a focus really with this website on moving away from climate-centric language, because actually what we found from the project was that people are much more likely to respond to things around comfort of their home, improved warmth, those kind of things, as opposed to climate-focused messaging really. So those kinds of learnings will be taken into the project, and yes, they will, they'll be interested in what the impact is in terms of the usage of the website. And I was also going to mention, yes, so the 150k I should say is also, so the bulk of that will be for the website development, but there is also a little bit of allocation for widening community energy champion schemes. So for example, we've got Our Power, they've got a little bit of funding through it. There are similar schemes operating in Great Yarmouth, so it's kind of expanding existing community energy advice services to sort of go alongside it really. So moving on to the next thing. So this was just a mention, although as an environmental strategy team, we tend to lead these things, we usually do a call around additional, other departments in the council to see what else is going on that is worth reporting. And we thought it's worth mentioning that our Parks and Open Spaces team have just launched their Parks and Green Spaces strategy called Green Spaces Better Places. And it's very much aligned to the council's biodiversity strategy and sets out how the council will invest in improve its parks over the next 10 years for the benefit of communities and wildlife. There was a launch event held at Waterloo Park on the 25th of November, which Phil attended alongside others. And just wanted to make you aware that that is now on the website essentially as a strategy. There was public consultation taken back in 2024, including through the Get Talking Norwich platform. So it's been a while in the development. And then, sorry, where I'm sort of time is pressing, I'm coming to the end of this now. But another relevant thing to mention, our environment services team are currently trialling a hot water weed removal system. So this is part of the council's desire to minimise herbicide usage wherever it's sort of safe, practical and financially sustainable to do so. The council has trialled a number of sort of alternative technologies over the recent past, and this is kind of the latest trial that's going on. And essentially how it works is it uses hot water and steam to kill off the weeds. Essentially works on the biochemical principle that proteins denature from a temperature of roughly 42 degrees Celsius. So the proteins change, break up, can no longer fulfill their functions, and essentially it kills off the weed and makes it easier to sort of extract mechanically. And that trial is ongoing, we're told, but we will of course be happy to communicate the findings of that trial once it's finalised. And that's currently being undertaken in sort of key city centre locations. And this was just a small one, but I thought it was a good photo and worth making people aware of, just should you ever want to have bike maintenance done as a councillor or as a member of staff. So we recently had Simon from Precision Cycles come and do a free bike maintenance day for staff. All sort of, funded by our team, as it were, to try and help promote active travel to staff. And it went very well. Uptake was pretty good, and we'll probably look to continue that, I think, on a 6-monthly basis to help encourage staff to cycle in where possible. And then the final bit from me is just to mention, there was mention in the SEEP report about some new KPIs that we're developing to go alongside the Climate Responsive Norwich programme and other future strategies. And we just wanted to say a little bit about them really, and how we're developing this suite of KPIs. So they've been developed sort of as part of the business planning process in accordance with the principles of what's called outcome-based accountability. And essentially it follows this flow of how much did we do, how well did we do it, and is anyone better off? And here is an example KPI which looks at the percentage reduction in year-to-date Scope 1 and 2 CO2 emissions. And essentially what this KPI will allow us to do is to more regularly, on sort of a month-by-month basis, give an indication of how the council's emissions reduction is coming along. Our current KPI basically looks at sort of an annual statistic that we report once a year, usually in line with sort of our carbon footprint accounting process. But by looking at sort of Scope 1 and 2 emissions, we get our gas and electricity data every month. So in theory, we can provide a stat around that every month. So we're looking to use some of these from January really for reporting where data exists, but as I say, we are still developing a full suite, and we'll look to bring it in future perhaps.
Yeah, this is part of a wider piece of work. To give you some context, so we've taken some consultancy advice on how to structure KPIs, and we find this really useful. It's from a process that's published by the Treasury. And we've got a lot of confidence in it. We're seeing one here. We've actually developed 5 KPIs for general funds, environmental action, climate action, 5 for HRA, 5 for biodiversity, and 5 for the city. And the advice is absolutely choose your KPIs according to what you need to steer your programs, and then go and look to see if the data's there. And if it is, great, and if it isn't, you might have to buy it, arrange a new data collection service, or if the data simply isn't there, then you're going to have to choose another one. And that's the process that we've gone through. So James is just going through an exercise of finding the data and kind of backcasting it over the last few months to see if it's, if it's reliable data. But what we hope to be doing, as James says, from January onwards, which will be our Q3 of this financial year reporting period, is starting to bring these new KPIs in, and that will be replacing the ones that we've got. But yeah, we're still kind of having internal discussions about where the data can come from and that kind of thing. But
I was just going to say, I think it'll probably sit alongside the existing ones initially, and the idea with these is they will eventually provide better granularity than the current ones do. Yeah. Okay, I think that's my section done really now. So we're now kind of, Phil, I don't know whether you want to give an introduction to this. We've got your initial slide here, and then we'll lead into Hannah's presentation.
In one moment, I've just realised that we've published a report and we've brought in a new format, but actually we haven't given an opportunity for anybody to comment on anything else in the report. Do any questions spring to mind regarding any of the other content in the SEEP report, or are members happy, Chair, are we happy that we proceed on to the next presentation?
Well, do we have any questions? I think we've got Councillor Bolton at the very least.
iChooser have communicated to us that Fresh Electrical do have the capacity this year, but they do always appoint a backup anyway. So they will have a contingency plan in place there. And yes, we should also, it's been mentioned in previous meetings, I know, about how our sort of installers vetted through that process. And I should just sort of say we've got a bit of clarity from iChooser about that. So installers must always be MCS accredited and either REC or HIES members to enter the process to actually bid. And the company who provides the best value offer wins the work, and post-installation inspections are also carried out.
Awesome, thank you.
No worries.
Shall I just keep rattling through? I've only got a couple more. Thank you. Number 14, Eco and GBiz. Obviously, Eco is closing down at the end of this year. How are we going to deal with that going forward? What's our response to that in terms of one of the avenues to get people the funding?
James, what am I doing wrong? We've seen that it's a problematic scheme, and it's a problematic scheme because there's no retrofit oversight in them. A member of the public can call an external wall insulation contractor and then a solar contractor, and there's no process for controlling how those measures impact on each other, and that's why we've seen so many problems in it. But to answer your question, we expect that funding to now come through Warm Homes Local Grant, which has seen a much higher success rate in delivery, much better satisfaction figures. So, you know, we expect the outcomes to be broadly the same, just the money come through a slightly different process. But to be confirmed, that's our understanding at the moment.
Awesome, thank you. I'll just ask one more instead of the others. There's now a decarbonisation plan piece of work happening to the community centres. And I remember about a year ago asking a question about the fact that you had said that there was going to be further surveys done, and from the initial surveys. What value did those first ones actually hold in terms of action actually taken? Because otherwise, should have these heat decarbonising ones not have just happened in the first place, as the preliminary ones just leading to these more in-depth, which is a great thing that these are happening, don't get me wrong, but just in terms of process of being as efficient as possible.
Good question. So Matter of Place Architects actually did those initial surveys. And I think we might even have a mention of community centres in your slides. So they were all measures. They were, how can we retrofit our community centres without impacting heritage, safely, most efficient way, using a mixture of measures, including fabric insulation, solar, heat pumps, improvement to lighting, ventilation, all that kind of thing. And they highlighted a number of possibilities. And what we've done is we've moved forward into the contracting, the delivery phase of that, based on the insulation, the fabric recommendation from MOPA's initial reports. But obviously there's lots of potential around, you know, we want in a phase 2 to take them through a kind of renewable energy phase of development. And we thought it was a really good idea to bring in a second set of consultants who specialise in heat pump in public buildings. You know that, and so what we're now doing is using the recommendations from MOPA's first reports. We're focusing in on heat pumps, and that's what the current round of surveys is about. It's going to be a little bit. There's a lot of surveys going on in community centres at the moment. Our apologies, they're kind of being focused into this period of time, so we want to spend the money. There's also the construction phase surveys going on around standard things that we do for every project, asbestos surveys, fire risk assessments, that kind of thing. So there is, you know, there's a focused activity going on. But we are listening to community centres. We understand that this is a busy time of year for them. Anybody who's requested for them to happen after Christmas, we've moved them to them. But we're seeing a lot of activity in that space at the moment.
Cool, thank you.
Do we have any further questions?
Yeah, I just wondered, you know, with the Solar Together thing, I think the registration was pretty similar last year, around 440. What was the actual uptake from the registration, if you can recall?
Top of my head. So yeah, I think we've had about 450 register, which tends to be quite similar each year. And I believe about 75 have actually then gone through and sort of made payment, which tends to be about the uptake rate that we expect really. So people go through the process, it's very much no obligation. They get an idea of what a quote is, and then you usually expect maybe 20% might actually go through it, through with it. But I can certainly find the definitive figure and send it.
Yeah, that's all right. And I just wondered if there's anything we can do to kind of increase the uptake.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting. I mean, iChooser, who run the scheme, they send out sort of direct mailing targeted at households. They have their model that essentially looks at sort of Expedia credit scores, that sort of they try to identify essentially who are the households who are most likely to actually go through with a solar installation, and that's who the direct mail outs are targeted to each year. And that approach continues to be used, but I suppose in a way, almost as we go through year to year, you've almost sort of taken the low-hanging fruit. So yeah, it probably does require a bit more thinking about how do you, as you sort of get those households that are most likely to do it, how do you sort of continue to sort of attract them. But it's we as a council, we promote it on social media usually, and yeah, we'll continue to sort of explore how we can promote that to the public, through things like the website that we're developing.
Thank you. And if I may, just one more, like on the point 4 on the document, like it says that the project team remains hopeful that a deliverable plan can be produced, which keeps the city's contribution to warming below 2 degrees C. Well, that language doesn't fill me with a huge amount of hope, because a team remaining hopeful, I really want to know that we're absolutely committed to that, and that the project team will deliver that, because plus 2 degrees, obviously, as a council, we've already kind of failed in terms of 1.5 was set by the IPCC as a safe guardrail temperature, and plus 2 degrees is obviously beyond that. So I wondered kind of how sure we can be that we will keep the city's contribution to warming below 2 degrees C.
Yeah, let me explain. So we've published the Climate Responsive Norwich programme, which absolutely reiterates commitment. So the IPCC's bandwidth was 1.5 to 2 degrees max, and you're absolutely right. But I do want to make one comment on something that you said, which is the council has failed. Actually, the council, it's not, the city's emissions aren't under the direct control of the council. We can influence them.
Yeah.
And so, the city and more widely, we're at 1.5 degrees now, and we're doubling down on our efforts to influence, lead and coordinate the city, and that's why we're bringing out the Climate Responsive Norwich programme document. So we're absolutely committed. We're still committed to the scatter approach and the budget that sets too. And so, we've run through several iterations of a plan that looks at what we need to do to keep the city's contribution to climate change below 2 degrees, and it's tough. It's tough if we try and do it within the city and the city's green spaces for things like planting to sequester, planting trees to sequester carbon. And that's been our guiding principle so far. And I think what we're finding is, we will have to do planting outside of the city's boundaries. Don't quote me on this, because we're running iterations of the model on a weekly basis, but we're very close to being able to describe a pathway to maintaining our contribution at below 2 degrees. But I think it will mean that we will need to plant outside of the city's boundaries, and by that we mean locally, Norfolk, that kind of thing. But that's what it's close. but we will bring a consultation here shortly on that.
Yeah, sorry, it was poorly worded with
That's okay.
council failing. But I know that when we talked about the scatter targets before, we were slightly behind target on the scatter targets in terms of like where our commitments were. This is a while back now. And I can't remember exactly what it was, but you will remember.
I mean, the
I
city,
wonder if we've done any catching up on that.
I think this is probably, it's a discussion that will take more time than we have today. I mean, what I can say is that the city's emissions are reducing really well. We're now below where our emissions were during the COVID year, for example. So actually, you know, the city has reduced its emissions, territorial, scope 1 and 2, we might call them emissions, by 60% since 2005. That's pretty good going. But it needs to accelerate even more so, and that's what the pathway plan will set out what we need to do that.
A couple of questions. I've got Councillor Laws and then Councillor Padder.
Thank you, Chair. Just on the trial alternative weed removal system, I believe you don't have the results yet, but do you know when they will be available?
You might know this next better than I.
Hi, Councillor. We just got the equipment in November, so there's different ways to use it with different attachments. We've asked our NCSL to run a couple of type 1 and type 2 tests in terms of to see there's different coverage per hour, slightly different attachments, and in slightly different places. You know, weed killing application takes a period of time, and we've asked them to document that and show us pictures. So, you know, it will be ongoing. We've also got some other mechanical type removal tools that we're trialing. So we can certainly keep you updated, but it'll be ongoing through the course of the year.
Thank you. So just one very detailed point. I didn't want to interrupt the flow earlier, but the solar panels at Eden Park, what does KWP mean? I'm familiar with KWH, I think.
So kilowatt peak, it means during the warmest summer day, how many kilowatts the whole system will produce. And it's a way of kind of comparing system sizes. So for example, your average house in Norwich will be using about 2 kilowatts at any one time, and so 29 kilowatt peaks is, if my maths was better, I'd be able to tell you how many households that equates to. But
About 14, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was just going to say, and the peak represents under peak conditions, really. So you're looking at sort of your sunniest days at, you know, the best angle for the sun, and that's partly why it's got the solar, the battery storage to go alongside it, really, so that when that site isn't using all of its potential, it can also store some for periods when the sun isn't shining.
Thank you.
Councillor Padder.
Thank you. I have a follow-on question from Councillor Fox's, actually. I wondered, so what about the 2 degrees? What can landowners, private landowners, do to kind of contribute to keeping below that? And do we have a role in encouraging landowners to be contributing, doing their bit?
we do very much. You know, we can use our powers of influence, leading coordination, convening where necessary. And I think certainly with the crossover with our biodiversity strategy is very strong. You know, that talks about improving biodiversity across the whole city, but we do that by improving habitat, which we do by planting often. And so, yes, we are in discussions, and so are our neighbouring local authorities with landowners about the role that they can play in sequestering carbon out of the atmosphere through that. And Jane will give an update on how we are using biodiversity net gain principles to fund two kind of co-benefits. One is improvement of nature, as I say, and the second is the sequestering of carbon. And the reason we've brought together 5 strategy areas under the Climate Responsive Norwich programme is because of the co-benefits that exist between them. You know, we very much work our biodiversity strategy into our climate action because there's so many crossovers that we can benefit from. So yes, the short answer is yes, and we are talking to landowners about how to do that.
Councillor Fox.
Yeah, with the KPIs, with that, like following on from that, with that in mind, you were saying about like some of the sort of nature solutions going to have to be moved outside of the city, and I just wondered.
We think they might be. It's something we're investigating.
Yeah. And I wondered whether like nature equity is in the key performance indicators. Yeah, whether that's one of the KPIs, and also how frequently the targets are for the KPIs, whether, you know, because sometimes if they're sort of quite distant, things can kind of be kicked a bit down the road. I wondered how frequent the updates for that are.
I think we might come back to you on that, only because we will collect. The idea is to collect the KPIs monthly and report them every 3 months. So, you know, for long-term targets, you will see a very small change month on month. You might not see any, and that is one of the kind of downsides of going to a monthly KPI. We'll be reporting them through the council's corporate reporting framework on a quarterly basis, so we should see some movement. But that's, you know, we're going to experiment with these new KPIs. We think it's the right thing to do, but, you know, it's going to take some experimentation to get them right.
And is nature equity included?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I was going to say there's some part of the issue with the monthly data is there's a few national data sets that we also are kind of exploring, which often report quarterly. But yes, some of those data sets are specifically around things like access to nature, you know, distance from households to nature spaces and those sorts of things. So they will feed into it.
Thank you.
Do we have any further questions? If I may, I know that we've got a busy agenda, but if I may just throw in one more question, it's just in relation to energy resilience. I took part in the Eco3 scheme, so I got the standard installation of solar. I've got neighbours who went private with their installation, and they got battery packs included. All the eco installations are the standard, and I've currently, for the last 3 weeks, I'm working off a generator because we've had a power cut in our little neck of the woods, and it was notable that the solar panels then stopped working, which was a bit frustrating. And it occurred to me that we're installing a lot of solar panels across the city, but if there was a power outage that affected the city, and this brings my mind to earlier in the year, which happened in Spain, are we not subject to, you know, we're not building resilience through these schemes, because if there is a power outage, it doesn't matter how many solar panels we've got, those houses still wouldn't have power. And I just found myself in a bit of a quandary about that. I know it's a bit of a convoluted question, but I just wondered if you could shed light.
That's more of an infrastructure issue, and the resilience. So all renewable generators embedded in buildings have to power down when the grid goes down. Otherwise, they risk electrocuting people working on the grid. So it's an absolute sacrosanct principle that, you know, that is a requirement of you have to have that set up in order to get permission to connect to the grid, and it's been like that forever. So, you know, local battery storage is very much a UK power networks consideration for how we manage power outages. But, you know, thankfully they're pretty rare. But yes, we won't be aiming to do that through any of our schemes. And in fact, the government has just announced that they've obviously had some problems with battery storage systems because they've asked us to stop installing them under our Warm Homes Local Grant Scheme. We've never installed them for this reason, but I think we're working through that at a kind of more of an infrastructure level.
Okay, thank you.
I was just going to add, thought it was just worth adding that because we have quite a good relationship with UK Power Networks, a lot of the sole kind of aim of their planning really is to make sure that the network as a whole can be resilient in the future, so they know what kind of loads and demands are going to be sort of on the system. So I think the work that we do with them hopefully helps to provide some sort of infrastructure security going forward therefore as well.
Thank you. I'll let you carry on.
I'm now we have got a lot to do, and just to set some expectations, I can trim my presentation at the end, but I think the idea is to keep things moving. And I'd very much like to introduce Hannah Willer. Hannah, I think you're managing director, are you? Of Matter of Place Architects, two local specialist architects firms, Matter of Place Architects and Matter of Fact Retrofit. We have committed to support and develop local supply chain. And if my arm was a little bit longer, I'd almost be able to touch your office because it's about 50 yards away. And we've been doing really great work with the folks at Matter of Place Architects around, some original thinking around how do we retrofit our social housing stock. And our social housing is, of course, very similar to housing in the city. So it becomes a kind of living laboratory for what we do with housing in the city. And so I set a brief which was to decarbonise our blocks in our social housing, which constitutes about 7,500 dwellings. It's about half of our housing stock. And I said, we can't increase the cost of heat to tenants as we decarbonise. The benefits have to be shared equally because in a block of flats, the people who live in the corner are much colder than the ones who live in the middle. So we need to understand this on a flat by flat basis to make sure that the benefits are equal. It needs to be affordable to the HRA, broadly aligning with the amounts that we've set out in the HRA business plan. And just a reminder that we've set aside £325 million to decarbonise and get to EPCC by 2045, minimise disruption to tenants. We have to consider whole life carbon, and we have to design for a warming climate. And then it was go. Over to you guys.
And that is music to our ears because I run two practices very much to address the exact issue that you raised earlier, which is the disconnect between design and delivery of retrofit measures. We call it retrofit, but a generation ago it was just called architecture or updating your building. It's just a reflection on what your building needs to do to adapt to the realities of the world in which you live. We will be able to see this evidence when we look back at buildings in 100 years and see why we did it. You can see it from buildings of the 70s when there was the previous wave, the previous oil crisis. So it's something, it's a terminology, but by bringing the experience that we have as architects, it actually allows you to think holistically about the delivery of the architecture and therefore address some of the concerns that Phil raised. So there's a quick summary of what we're going to say. So who I am and why we do this, a little bit about the buildings that you manage and are responsible for, what best practice looks like, and some examples of the assessments that we've been doing. So this is us. So as Phil said, we're very close. You might be able to recognise from the image we are on Uppergoat Lane, so we couldn't be closer really. I'm from Norwich. I went away and did my training in the northwest and came back to Norwich with my small children because I couldn't bear the idea of bringing them up without our coastline. So I've brought them back here while I work. And this is my team. I set up the practice specifically with a lot of part-time employees so that I can employ female architects, which is a really high risk factor for dropout. I, soon after setting up the practice, realised that retrofit was being done badly and that actually people who were trained should be able to offer value to this process. So I run 2 practices with the same people. So we cut it different ways. So I have more administrative support in the process for the retrofit, and I have more architects, and we've honed a very specialist assessment process, which I'll go through. Norwich has the largest proportion of council-owned homes in any city in the UK at 30%. There's our graph. We use this all the time when we're talking about Norwich and about why here, why this is so important. And it means that you have a special responsibility, but also a special opportunity to work out what large-scale retrofit looks like and how it can be delivered. So most homes, it's actually 80% of homes that are functioning in 2050 have already been built. So when we talk about net zero homes, we're not really talking about new homes. We're talking about the homes that already exist. And that is very hard for people to get their head around, the level of retrofit that we're going to be needing to do. Luckily, we don't need to do as much as people often think. And that is what we're trying to work out, is how to spend the carbon we have wisely so that every carbon measure you put on a building pays back in terms of both cost and carbon. There's a fact that PIR, which is the standard, if you can imagine insulation, it's the stuff that breaks, it's the stuff that goes into modern houses. So 100 mil of PIR insulation, which is what goes into new houses, has to stay in place for between 50 and 80 years before it pays off the carbon it costs to put in the building. So we have to be so careful with the measures we're putting into buildings now to not spend the carbon that we have left in trying to save it in the future. They call it the carbon burp. So what we're trying to do is bring intelligence to that process to minimise the spend. So why retrofit? And I know I'm preaching to the converted here, but the 3 targets are energy efficiency, tenant well-being, and long-term asset resilience. All of those have to be targeted for it to be successful retrofit. You have to have the tenant's well-being at the very heart of the measures, both in the design to make sure they're happy and that they maintain the work that's been done, but also for the uptake, which is is one of the major barriers to retrofit, is people are resistant to change. And so you've got to make it attractive and show an offer at the end. So we've been designing a process to try and minimise the works. So move on. So this is one of my favourite images. So luckily, Norwich City Council have got an amazing archive. It's one of the best of the local authorities. So lucky that was maintained at a previous point when the architecture department were moved out of the city. So Norwich City Council housing is from every period. I think you still have some from the 17th century. So you have the council housing across, but a majority of them are from this really exciting period from 1957 to the mid-70s, and this was an early award-winning scheme at the top of Burr Street where a lot of the archetypes that we've been assessing were tested. It's like a test bed for the later rollout of the designs. So we've been looking at assessments of 11 different kinds of low-rise blocks, and you can trace back the architecture of most of them to this one little unit. So it's really interesting how innovative Norwich City Council have been since the outset. This was under David Percival in the 1950s. If you go forward. So this is another good one. This is just from Google, but you can see so many of the different kinds of buildings that Norwich manage in this scheme. So in the middle, these low ones with the black roofs, the little low ones, that's sheltered housing. You've got the high-rise blocks. We've not been looking at them. They are really hard to retrofit. And in the foreground, these ones are one of the later archetypes, and then in the middle of here we've got the low rise. So if you can see the 3 to 7 story blocks, these are what we're looking at when we say low rise. They're where our work has been focused. So if you're looking at retrofitting an individual house, you use PAS 2035, and there are really good specialists who work through this process. This the eagle-eyed amongst you will notice that this PAS flow diagram is from the pre-2023 issue, and we now have a more recent one, but I didn't have a nice diagram for that, so I've put this one in. But for individual homeowners, PAS 2035 is the route to retrofit assessment. However, for low-rise blocks, it doesn't give you the answers you need because you've got multi-tenancy units. And when we were talking about equity earlier, the answer for one person can actually make your neighbour's conditions worse. And that's what all of the emerging understanding and best practice of retrofit is, that there are knock-on impacts in building physics from you retrofitting your property. And so as a collective landlord, you need to think about the whole building. So even here, can you see on number 7, it says requirements for a whole dwelling assessment. Now, in an individual house, your whole dwelling is your house. If you have a block of flats, the whole building is multiple blocks of flats, and multiple flats. And so what we've been doing is developing an assessment process which looks both at the individual dwelling and the building to see what the overall impact is of the retrofit measures. So, as you said earlier, we started testing this process when we did the stage 1 assessments on the community centres. So the reason that we started there is because there's a parallel process called PAS 2038, which is for commercial properties, which deals with the nuance of multi-tenancy a lot better. And it enabled us to look at the potential for fabric upgrades with the community centres, avoiding in most instances external wall insulation. And we're not avoiding it because of the later failures, because it is possible to do external wall insulation well. We're avoiding it because people may disagree, but these buildings are lovely. Like, they were designed with real community focus when they were delivered. Some of them have had really poor maintenance and upgrade, which has degraded the value of the buildings. But actually, there was a lot of thought and care put in these buildings when they were delivered. And to blank that out in render, which is fine, but it's not specific to the locations where these are. A lot of them have trees with a lot of overhang. A lot of them are shady. You're going to get staining. There's a lot of other issues with render, and you will have ongoing issues with graffiti. So there are other issues to do with the work.
I didn't mean to stop you in full flow. I think what you when we were discussing the brief was that actually retrofit has the potential to cause a significant loss of heritage in the city. You know, we have lovely buildings, our red brick streets. Do we want to cover them in a kind of brand new white render? So as the brief evolved, you know, we became very interested in conserving heritage as well as delivering our climate commitments.
And you will find there's a lot of discussion in the retrofit world about the overall longevity of cavity wall insulation, because it fails, and it does. There are a lot of evidence of cavity wall insulation failing nationally. In the east of England, we are incredibly dry. We still have issues with purge rains, so we still have big rain, but overall our rainfall is very different to the areas where cavity wall insulation is failing at the rates that's being found out. So if we were in Manchester, where I used to live and used to design buildings, or in Wales, cavity wall insulation is you have to really work out whether you can make sure you can maintain your building to the necessary level that water isn't going to get in. Whereas here, our buildings, they get wet and then they dry out again. And so it gives us a lot more opportunity for being braver with our retrofit measures. So the process that we do when assessing any building is to go and look at it. We were really lucky to be supported by Innovate UK to do our work in establishing best practice in retrofit. So we own loads of really good kit, and the picture is a U-value measurement tool, and that enables us to go and actually put it on a wall and see how that wall is thermally performing. So rather than using assumed data and then looking at the upgrade of the fabric under assumed conditions, and they're always very cautious. So this enables you to really validate the position of how that fabric is actually performing. We then go and take LiDAR scans, which is where you stand in the space and do a 3D scan, and then we make these little models. So this is out of our software called ArchiCAD. So it just creates a little digital twin, basically, of the building. We then use PHPP. So thermal modelling is very complicated, and I'm not going to bore you with it here, but basically PHPP is building based. So it looks at the different elements of the fabric and how they're contributing to the thermal performance of the building. So the different colours in those stacks are the different areas of the building. So one would be walls, one would be windows, one would be roof. So you actually get an idea of where to target the measures specifically for that building. As people outside of the industry, I bet you thought that that was how retrofit was designed everywhere, but it's not, because usually it's designed using SAP, which is a different modelling software, which is all assumptive. And it assumes you're looking at a standard building in Sheffield. So it's all based on the specific, because it's about comparing one building to another. It's not about the specifics of that building. Right, if we move on. So then we had worked with Norwich City Council to hone that into a process that could look at the social housing low-rise blocks. And this is the process that we've been following. So these are your blocks. So we've got...
I might just jump in.
Yeah.
Trouble. I think what we're saying there, to summarise, is predicting how buildings behave is a really important thing to get right. So, for example, if you measure how well or poorly heat travels through a wall, obviously we don't want heat travelling through walls. It's why you have to run your central heating system. If we can understand in great detail how all of your windows, all of the walls, the roof, how moisture works, how the ventilation works, we can develop a computer model that predicts it in the future. We can warm up the external weather data by 2 degrees and see how it performs in a warming climate. We can change the insulation types of a wall or do more ventilation because we think it's necessary. And what we can tell from that modelling is exactly how much energy the building will use, how much carbon it will emit, how it impacts people's well-being through things like ventilation. So a lot of this work has been about understanding what are the best computer modelling techniques to allow us to do scenario analysis on our buildings.
And all of the assessments we've been doing, we've been stress testing for overheating as well, because at the moment our key concern is heating, is the cost of heating our buildings. But we are within a zone that within 20 years, overheating in buildings is going to be more pressing than insulating them. So if you're looking at maintaining, and that's because cooling loads of any system are higher than heating loads. So what we're trying to do is work with the assessment process to try and design measures to avoid active cooling in all but extreme circumstances. So here are the low-rise blocks, the archetypes. These are spread across the city. Some you will recognise from your own areas, some you'll recognise from just moving around. Because there are so many of them, you will recognise them all. The MM archetype, sorry, if you just go back a second. So the MMs are the tall with the linear glazing. The 100s, the 110s are both evolved from that earlier site plan that I showed, where the little melting pot. The PBFs are a cruciform plan, so these are really simple stacks of flats. G is the Gildencroft, so these are a mixed construction, so they're houses with timber frame mansard roofs. If you go on to the next one.
I'll just say I think we've got about 50 odd archetypes in our social housing.
Yeah. That's right. And yeah, so these are some of the most populous, but there are a lot more. The R is Rider Haggard Road. These are flats stacked to look like houses. The DG is Pengrove. These are really lovely houses of their period, really lovely lighthouses to live in. The M is a steel frame. It looks like it's traditionally constructed, but it's not. The MX at the bottom is one of the most, oh no, hold on, I've got them the wrong way around. The M is going to be one of the most complex to retrofit because it's actually a modular home that was built in a period when local authorities tried lots of innovative construction methods, and they've found all around the country, but luckily you don't have too many of them because they're very tricky to retrofit. The 59 are rows of terrace blocks, and the Z are, you'll recognise, so they're a sort of long, low, flat block. So this is one of the ones that I think is one where we talk about this loss of civic contribution and heritage. There are some areas of the city where single archetypes make up large areas. So this is North Lakenham, so this is just off Southwell Road, and this archetype is called the CC. And in terms of equity for tenants, this is one of the most challenging because this is really early. So this is late 40s. It predates that best practice movement in council housing, and the ground floor of these are solid wall, and so everybody who's on the ground floor is paying huge amounts more for their energy than to keep their flats warm than the people on the upper levels. And that's the kind of issues that the retrofit measures need to be able to offer a solution to. Move on. So we can look at the ambition of the social housing programme. This is one of the early ones of the MM, so you can see the quality of architecture that they were striving for when they set out on this programme. So what we've done as part of our work on the site survey is try and record where there's public art, decorative elements and other things adding civic value to the city, so they can be retained, or if they can't be retained, moved and replicated or relocated. This is really interesting. So as part of the work we've done, we've collected all the EPC data for the varying flats, and you can look at the different colours. All of this, these are the same flats in the same units. So you can see that the EPCs don't really record the exact living conditions of the people within the flats. The table at the bottom was collated by Etude, who are great thinkers in the construction world, and those spikes are showing the actual energy performance of different EPC values. And so it's why EPC is the only measure we have for targeting funding, but it's not necessarily a good guide on where to target your retrofit measures.
Does that make sense? So EPC, very blunt tool. All of government funding is allocated to get dwellings that are below EPC C to C, but actually the story is much more complicated than that. And sometimes there's a strong justification for treating flats that are already at C because they might be a low C, or with sort of having along with other social housing providers like us, we're sort of understanding the limitations of EPC and what we can do to kind of work around it. Thank you.
So now we have done these assessments on these 11 archetypes that I've showed you earlier, and this is an example of how we're plotting the data. So you see the pink and orange arrows. So the pink and orange indicate different orientations, because obviously buildings facing one way get more solar gain than buildings facing another. So we have these pink and orange arrows are how the varying flats in this archetype are performing in terms of the amount of heating that is required in each property. Now, so my lovely assistant here will point at the tall blue bars. So the tall blue bars are the average heating demands for homes of a similar size. So you can see that some of the cluster of arrows are within the average values, but some of them are much higher. So some of the tenants are already paying a lot more to heat their homes than is standard for the UK housing stock. And then the green bits No, that's exactly right. And then on the left, these arrows are best practice for how the energy demand should be in housing. So there's new build. So that's if you meet building regs, that's where you would be. LETI is the London Environmental Transformation Initiative, something along those lines. But they wrote a brilliant guide on retrofit. And so they set that as a realistic target. Passive House and Enefit are the cream of the cream. So they're the best of the best. And you have some of those. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. And then if we move on to the next graph, so this is a different way of presenting the data. So the first column on the left is that heating demand, which was on the previous slide. So it's one of those arrows, but recorded as an annual heating demand upwards and peak heating load, which is the peak heating, which is exactly what you asked about earlier. So this is the peak heating load of each of the buildings. So to get onto a heat pump, you want to get the peak heating load below the threshold on the bottom. Yeah. And so then we've looked at a number of different options for retrofit and collated them into 3 packages, which are the last 3 columns on the right. So you can see we've designed one that gets you just under the threshold. We've done one which is a little bit better, and that's if there's budget allowable, or if some flats require more work than others when you actually get to doing on a local flat by flat basis. And then there's one which is getting below the LETI guidance, which is the green line on the top. So there's one package showing how you could get to best practice, but in most instances they're very expensive. There's very rare that you can get that far without looking at extraordinary outlay onto your buildings. And for you, there's also the issue of decant. So what we've been trying to do is design programs of work that can be delivered with the tenants in situ, because if you're looking at programs of decant for families in multi-residency units, that adds a lot of cost and complexity and resistance as well to the programme. So all of these packages have been designed to either work to the outside of the building or in voids, so that when you do them iteratively, it's not a problem. So when we're designing the packages, we work with this best practice approach, which is starting from understanding your building. So you start from a place of knowledge, so you don't inadvertently do things to the building which cause big maintenance issues later. You make sure that you look at repair and maintenance, because repair and maintenance can improve the thermal performance of a building by 20% alone. Then you look at simple measures, which is draft proofing, looking at ventilation within the spaces and loose lay insulation. And then only when you've done those do you start looking carbon balance measures like intrusive works. So this gave us a suite of retrofit options for the different types. This one is the Gildencroft. So this is showing quite a straightforward. These buildings are pretty good. They've already had cavity wall. So some of them are the ones in the centre of the terrace are already pretty good. The ones at the end will need some work. And this is where we come to that equitability. At the moment, the people at the ends of the terrace are paying a lot more for their heating than the ones in the middle. And then this is a more complex scheme, which is the MMs. So with these, one of the major issues, and this is regardless of whether you do retrofit or not, within 5 years, overheating in some of these units is going to be, it's called catastrophic, which sounds terrible, but it means over 15% of the year, you could be looking at over 25 degrees inside some of the homes. So retrofit would at this instance be looking at both the energy efficiency in terms of the heating of the space, but also opportunities for improving ventilation and cooling. I mean passive cooling, like opening windows and reducing glazing, not assisted cooling. This is a great one. So this is the CCs, which is the one I showed earlier, where you had the whole area. So there's loads of them in one area. And one of the problems with these is that the ground floor flat has got these brilliant buggy stores. So it was a really great design. So they have each flat has a downstairs space to keep buggies and bikes and things like that. But it means that the flats that back onto that have a huge uninsulated cold wall going into a cold lobby. So an easy way to deal with, I say easy, it's not easy, but an easier way to deal with that would be to bring the lobby into the heated space, and then suddenly you stop that flat losing all of its heat into the cold lobby. So there are some just quite small measures that can make huge difference to the most impacted by the current thermal performance of these blocks. And then for every package that we've looked at the whole life carbon over 60 years. 60 years is a standard period for looking at whole life carbon. This is quite a normal one. So if you look at the brown going up on the left, that's if you don't decarbonise. So that's the projected energy use over time. The blue is if you just put in a heat pump. So you're still looking at a huge saving in terms of carbon, not cost, but carbon, if you just put in a heat pump. But then by putting in the retrofit measures, you can also reduce the long-term carbon impact of your project. If you look on the left, that's how far up the line starts, is the initial outlay in carbon to get to that point. So the next one is really interesting, because this one shows that if you just put in the heat pump alone, you end up expending more carbon. So this is really interesting. So for here, can you see that big step along the coloured lines? That is where you replace the photovoltaics. So this has replacement built into the whole life carbon. So if you can carry on. And then this one is just looking at the avoiding fuel poverty. So this is looking at if you just put in a heat pump, you could be looking at a 30% uplift on bills for the tenants. And so then we were looking at the different packages that we talked about earlier. And if you applied them, what potential saving you could get to. And we're targeting as close to existing bill level as possible. So you're definitely not looking at an uplift. In retrofit, depending on the design of the process, there can be between a 5 to 20% performance gap as standard. So you would always want to target a saving for retrofit measures if you're trying to get to cost equity for the bills. And then this is a good example of equitability. This is the CCs that I was saying earlier. These, all of the colours are the different flats within the block, and some of them, as I said, have a really worse thermal outcomes than others. And so this is looking about how you can do different packages of measures in different areas of the building to make equal, to bring it as close to equal as possible for the tenants. And this is us.
So we wanted to
take a deep dive into some of the work we're doing, and over the coming SEEP meetings, we'll take a look into different areas. But I sort of wanted to give an insight into the fact that, you know, is pretty complicated stuff, and we are very mindful of that. We've got a lot of in-house expertise on retrofitting and some really excellent support locally. And so we're making some really detailed assessments and plans that allow us to move into you know, contracting and delivery phase in our low-rise blocks en masse at some point soon. So yeah, we hope that was useful for you. Yeah, and I just want to say thank you, Hannah, and your team for taking on the challenge of.
Can I just say that thank you? I actually, I love Norwich, and I designed my practice hoping that we would get the opportunity to make this offer to Norwich. So it's been really, it's a lovely piece of work to be working on, because it matters to me that the buildings here are paying their, you know, doing what they can to avert the climate emergency that we're heading into.
If I may,
Yeah, go through, Phil, or I mean, yes, you can come and see me. We just round the corner, so pop in anytime.
I think it would be important that they do come through us.
okay,
Yeah.
because that was absolutely fascinating, and I've got lots of questions percolating. So thank you.
Thank you. And well, I was just going to say, if we now move on to Jane, I'm mindful of time, but I think hopefully we've got enough to get through this, and then a bit on heat networks as well. So,
Yeah.
okay,
How much time?
Can we do 20 minutes?
20 minutes?
And then I can wrap up mine in
Yeah,
short.
So I've only got 7 slides, so I'll move through them fairly swiftly. Do ask questions. I'm not running the slides.
right.
So yeah, so I was asked to do a Nature City Norwich project update briefly. Don't know does anyone need to have a refresh on what that is, or are you familiar with it? So it's a partnership project, and we've got HLF funding with in-kind of over £1 million over 3 years to create nature recovery and community access to nature broadly across the city and beyond. So up to the NDR and down to the A47. So that includes districts, and we're partnering with districts and with county and NWT. So that's the introduction. We've been working since August, when we received the good news that we'd won the bid, on the partnership governance, the legal and compliance activities, which are intense, and we're nearly there. We'll be complete by January, along with the recruitment. So it's a capacity building project. There's no capital spend, so it's to have recruitment and consultants available to do those kind of thinking processes, planning processes that allow us to develop the project, which is really integral to the biodiversity strategy for the city. So the recruitment's in a really good place. We've got great diversity of skills, and we've got 5 out of the 6 recruited already, which is ahead of the 18 other nature towns and cities, which I'll talk a little bit more about later. So we're kind of going great guns. We've just got county left to recruit, and they're looking at possibly an internal recruitment, so that might speed the process up enormously. And we've got some really interesting skills coming in. We've got someone who's been working in as an academic ecologist, working and teaching in Essex. So they're coming to, and they've been running lots of projects themselves, research projects, so they have management skills as well, and lots of community-based skills across the team. So we're running monthly steering group meetings, and each partner is hosting. So we've got a 4 host carousel. We have a project group of 8, so those are the recruits plus me, and we're working together on Thursdays. We thought that was a really good way of bringing our new recruits together, and making sure that we were kind of bonded as a team, that we were working together to avoid lots of separate meetings. We can be in the same space together, so we're hoping to do that here at the City. Our activities that we're currently taking place are stakeholder mapping, and we're planning the Nature City Norwich Nature Conference. That's going to be on the 10th or the 18th of June next year, so keep your diaries clear. That's going to be a day conference with case studies, workshops and practitioners who are working in the city already, to see how we can build more teams and develop the work that we're already doing and amplify that. Natural England and National Trust, who are the project, the programme, Nature City Norwich programme sponsors, are part of our support team in Norwich locally. So we have 3 of those who are going to start coming to our steering group meetings. So we've met them now. We've got a project planning day coming up to do some fine tuning for the 3 years, and we've been to the Nature City Norwich conference and developed a project synopsis there. That was at the Liverpool conference. Just on the next slide.
Come in at that point. So what this means is that there are now 6 new people in Norwich recruited into Norwich City Council, South Norfolk and Broadland, the County Council and Norfolk Wildlife Trust, who are meeting regularly and have formed a new group that is solely for the purpose of planning nature recovery in the city. And what Jane will talk about is, you know, what this project looks like over the 3 years. But the funders, the Heritage Fund, have identified quite rightly that the biggest barrier to improving nature in cities is the planning, the bums on seats to do this work. As you've just seen in retrofitting, you know, retrofitting isn't just slapping insulation on houses, and it's really quite complex stuff. And so is nature recovery. And so, you know, we now have the resources over 3 years to do the kind of work for nature that Hannah's team been doing in retrofitting. It's getting into the detail.
So as I say, the Nature Towns and Cities programme, it was a 2-day event, and the programme itself is UK-wide, and there are 18 cities. We all got together for a couple of days in Liverpool. It's a kind of circle of trust. We have cohort meetings monthly, do lots of knowledge sharing. Here we are getting together, and we went round to the city and looked at some of the case studies of the green infrastructure that they're developing across the city with really innovative techniques. They're working in hard spaces, but working on flood alleviation with planting trees and with a really high water table. That's one of the examples, and there were lots of other really interesting work that they're doing there. I just wanted to show you what we did. The project synopsis was great. We had lots of professionals there helping and supporting us, working on theory of change and logic models, which we've already done for our project, and evaluation support. And we got really great feedback from Nature Towns and Cities and Heritage Lottery Fund staff, sort of higher up management staff, who came around and talked to each of us individually about what we were planning on doing. But our Nature City Norwich synopsis, we had lots of really great text in our summary bid, you know, that was quite lengthy and in detailed, and they asked us to try and boil it down into something that could really be an elevator pitch. So you can take this with you. We're going to stick with this. We're really happy with it, and it can be expanded for lots of different kinds of audiences with more detail backing it up. But we've ended up with an ambitious plan of action to restore and create nature-rich communities that everybody wants to deliver together. And what I'm really proud of is actually bringing nature-rich and communities together, because that can mean lots of different things to lots of different communities. And we hope that people will engage with that and decide on what they want themselves. That's the really important part. And also, of course, nature-rich communities can also mean the ecology itself. Very very briefly, just a second on our timeline. So the support that we're getting from Nature Towns and Cities is great. This is just a year's support that they're offering us, cohort meetings every month where we will learn a lot, in-person visits, which we've had, as I said, evaluation help. So they're working on a kind of template for evaluation across all of the programme, but helping us use the evaluation so it's really effective. So we're working towards some seriously nuanced aims for the city, and making sure we fulfil those. Lots of group learning and mentoring, and yeah, the resource development. The resources, if you want to look, the website is open to all, the Nature Towns and Cities website. Do go and have a look if you're interested in nature recovery, because there's lots of information that's open to everybody, so you can gain lots of insights there. So I'm going to talk about two pilots that we're doing at the moment. One on Heartsease Recreation Ground. So why?
Can I just jump in at that point? So the great thing about Nature Towns and Cities is that it acts as an umbrella for nature recovery delivery projects in the city, both in terms of green space and rivers. And it does that without reference to the city council's boundary. It's the project boundary is around the whole city. So it's a really interesting thing we're doing for the first time to, work at that scale with nature recovery. And so Jane's going to talk us through a couple of the individual projects which kind of fall within the umbrella of Nature City Norwich.
Yeah. So we've been developing these for half a year or so. They've come to us in lots of different ways. By talking about Nature City Norwich project, that's really increased interest across the city, from our citizens and from staff within the city. So people get in touch with me and say, oh, there's a potential project here. But this particular one was developed before I came to the City Norwich. It started with Maiawaki and Wildflower Meadows, and we looked at how we could increase it, which I'll go on to in the next slide. But I wanted to talk about why we've chosen this. So our aim generally across the city is to create nature-rich doorstep spaces. Here, in this particular site, we can do this combined with play, sport, active travel, recreation, and we can also unlock BNG potential. So we're working on this pilot to improve habitat richness, and this really represents a typical kind of urban amenity grassland. So it's a type that, although it's a rec, it could also be applied to our community housing land. And we have 600 hectares of that under our control in terms of maintenance. So whatever we trial here can be explored and developed further across the city. As I say, there's an existing Maiawaki, which is a little mini forest project that's already going on there with 300 new trees. Back. Thank you. That's all right. It's in Arita, this site, and those are the target areas that we're going to be looking at in Nature City Norwich. So on central Norwich bus route and an active travel route. So it really represents a great place to start doing our trial for lots of different reasons: social inclusion and nature recovery, and we can work at scale. So what's really interesting about it is that it's got a small woodland around the margin, so we can develop that. And I'll talk a bit more about why that's interesting later. We've had some data come to us. It provides also a stepping stone site between the large woodlands to the east, Harrison's Wood and Racecourse Plantation, which is a county wildlife site, and Mousehold Heath, which is a local nature reserve, county wildlife site, and has a triple SI, so one of our precious sites. But by making these stepping stones, we increase the ability of resilience for species, and also develop our nature network so that people can move from nature space, one nature space to another. Thank you. So very interestingly, someone called Cass Barrett arrived on our doorstep, and she is an amazing postgrad research assistant. She's currently working on a PhD in swallowtail cryogenics. I know, amazing, isn't it? With chrysalis. So she's moved away from green infrastructure, but her postgrad research was in green infrastructure, and she was trying to find out, she's a local person, she lives here, she was trying to find out whether there was an impact on habitat dependent on population density and particularly types of habitat spaces. So she looked at 2 ancient woodlands and 2 wrecks, and one of them happened to be Heartsease wreck. So I'll just tell you about, there's lots of other data to deliver that she brought to our table, but I'll just tell you specifically about Heartsease Recreation Ground. So we know from her, she's given us data, so we don't have to do a baseline survey in the same way that we would normally. We will have to do some if we want to work on BNG, which is going to be able to sell credits for the work that we're doing there potentially. But she's developed data that we can help feed into that baseline, and that Heartsease wreck is comparatively rich in grassland species and is a foraging habitat. She's worked on bird surveys as an indicator species, along with doing a plant survey as well. And what she found at Heartsease wreck is that out of all the sites, that includes the ancient woodland, Heartsease wreck particularly has the highest number of red list bird species. So those are protected birds, and they're not seen on any of the other sites. They're completely unique to this site. And we think that's possibly because of this woodland margin, which is not entered. It's somewhat inaccessible. It's unmown and it's quite continuous, but not entirely. So I'll talk about the proposals that we have to increase the habitat corridor. Her findings tell us that it's the diverse habitat on a site, not the local population density, which is the single factor which positively affects the species richness and the abundance in urban areas. And that's something she was incredibly surprised by. So now we understand that the ancient woodlands are really important in terms of a different kind of habitat richness and abundance. But places like recreation ground, which on the face of it would look like not particularly habitat friendly, not species friendly in any way, actually do have a really important part to play. And there's certainly areas that we can increase habitat value in for everybody's benefit. So this is the project. What's interesting is that we were able to develop a collaboration between us at Norwich, NCSL, the Norwich Fringe Project, now Mind have joined us, and our community enabling team. Everyone's working together to develop the creation of 370 metres of mixed native hedgerow, which you can't really see on this plan because it's actually a huge area, and it's just to the north on Sale Road. So it's that green line that you can see just on the sort of north side there. But we've actually developed it. This is an early draft, and it now comes all the way round through into the car park where the club and the Mooga are. Native hedges are a priority habitat under UK HAB, and they have very high ecological value, along with orchards and deciduous woodland and wildflower meadows. So we're developing 600 square metres. There's a 12-metre band of wildflower meadow, which are the kind of green worms that are going around the edge of the tree line. And we'll leave a dog walker's path around there, in between there and the woodland, so that people still have the amenity value that they would like to have there. There's lots of dog walkers. We will also try and keep all our arisings from the wildflower meadows on site with a potential dead hedge inside the woodland. So we're working on that with a new community group that we're developing with Mind and the community enabling team. What else can I say? Yes, so anyway, we have a volunteer planting day on week commencing 19th of January, so it'll either be the Wednesday or Thursday. If anyone would like to come and help us plant 370 metres of mixed native hedgerow, that's going to take some doing. So please join us if you like. And in spring, we'll be planting and seeding the wildflower meadows with perennials and a nurse of annual seeds, so that you get a good flush of flower in the first part of the year.
Could I say a little bit about the biodiversity?
Yes. Not so much at the moment, but we're working on it.
We're starting to understand how biodiversity net gain can fund, in part possibly, nature recovery in the city. So the reason this is a pilot, this isn't just about how do we augment an existing green space for nature. Jane has been choosing the design of the naturing of this space, so to speak, using planting schemes that score very highly in the biodiversity net gain metric. The reason they score high, I'll explain what that is in a second. The reason they score highly is because they're very good for nature. But what the council's doing here on a piece of its own land is it's banking biodiversity net gain credit, which it can then sell to developers in the city, potentially. We're still working through how this works. The council can then transfer this benefit, this biodiversity uplift that we've created, to developers who might be needing to develop housing in the city where there's perhaps loss of habitat. And we think, and it's going to take another couple of years to work through all the processes, but we think this could be quite a significant revenue stream for the council, which unlocks housing, important, but equally as important, improving habitat in the city and helping us to develop a citywide nature recovery network. So early days, it's all complicated stuff, but we think there's funding for nature recovery here that we can play an active part in.
This is another pilot that I've been working on. It's called Back Garden Nature. Just note before I start talking about it, you may have all heard this fact, but the UK back gardens joined together make a larger area than all the national parks, which is quite a substantial an area. So by developing and improving biodiversity in everyone's back gardens, we can make a pretty good dent in our nature recovery needs. So this particular project aims to increase the habitat types. Again, like the other ones, keep arisings on site and clearance costs directed to habitat enhancement. Create biodiversity recharge hub for local species overwintering, feeding and breeding.
Can we just do the basics on this? So these are back gardens in our social housing. Is that right? Am I right in saying?
Yes, I was going to go on to that, actually. Yeah, just sort of tell you about why we're doing this. And so we'd like to increase habitats in the ecotones, which are the transition zones between two different kinds of habitat, and those are the most important places for species. So bird and hedgehog populations particularly would enjoy those areas and inverts. What we've done here is an innovative license return, which has not been done before, I think, with underused tenanted back gardens being brought back to the council when they're not wanted by the tenant. And that's quite a long, involved relationship building process by the tenancy management team. And they're the ones leading, finding those gardens. So they work so closely with the tenants. And then we want to turn them into undisturbed, reserved for nature microfugia. So the sort of recharge engines for those back garden areas. As I said, it's a joint initiative between housing, fringe team, the tree officer who's working on the new one, and the conservation volunteers. And we're leading and bringing the team together. And we were scoping in 24-25 for varied garden types. So we want to have 3. We've got 2 at the moment, 1 that we're working on. We're looking for different types, so a scrub type, a wooded type, and a grassland type to trial different methods. I'll show you the next one that we're working on the next slide. So this is the first one that we worked on Gertrude Road, which is just south of Mousehold Heath. And the site conditions there were very typical scrub, which was overgrown with garden hedge species. And what happens is those gardens become antisocial problems for neighbours. They push over the fences. They become fly-tipped. We are going in, doing work on them, making a margin around the work that we're doing so that the fences are not damaged by any overgrowth, and then increasing the habitat in lots of different ways. And this particular one, TCV worked on it for 2 days. They built this lovely dead hedge, which they're very pleased with. I don't think they've done something like that before. That's a bug hotel, and it is somewhere to keep the arisings tidy. And it, you know, it looks good when it's a good example of how to make habitat in your garden. The maintenance is under review. We're potentially looking at volunteers or community payback, or I should say green gym. We're asking them to come and do the weeding, so the initial work has taken place. And currently we're looking at potential citizen monitoring of that habitat. So that's the only sort of missing element there. And 2 or 3 things have come our way. One is the fit, which is about looking at one single flower for 10 minutes and doing that repeatedly on a site, and uploading that information actually gives a really good indication of the kind of habitat that's providing for inverts. So that's one that's gone ahead. This is our next one that we're working on in January. This is again on Gertrude Road. Just to say, these sites, we have to spend quite a lot of time looking at them. Lots of them come up. We might think, oh, that's a great site. And then once the tenant's interested to start with, but then the tenant backs away because those sites are no longer going to be accessible to them. So they have second thoughts. So we've had lots of backtracking. So it might seem like quite an easy job to find these overgrown gardens, but actually the process, it can take some time to really negotiate. This particular one we were quite excited about because it presented a dense wooded site, which is fairly rare with very few species. So we know that we can do lots of uplift there. It's got very limited understory. It's quite dark. And our planned interventions there are tree coppicing, glade creation, and working with TCV to plant more scrub, fruiting scrub, and diversify the species, create habitat piles from some of the timber that we're bringing down, and more dead hedging there. And in the second year, we'll look at grass species in the glade. The next one. Oh, that's me, done. I thought I had another one.
I just wanted to, amazing project. I just wanted to say where that came from. And our colleagues in housing knocked on our door and said, oh, we've got this problem with overgrown gardens. You get overgrown, neighbours complain. Before you know it, it's got a washing machine thrown in it, knocking the fences over. Costs a fortune to sort it out. What can you do? And we thought, well, if we worked out how to get the overgrown garden back into the council's control through this licensing amendment, then we can use volunteer resources to convert it into a mini nature space. All the neighbours are happy. It saves the council money. It's a great pilot, and I really think it will be something that we can look to roll out. And again, it's all complicated stuff. Just sorting the license out took about 8 months or something. But everybody in the council's really signed up to it. It saves money, it improves nature, and they're the sort of projects that we're really looking to, you know, with those multiple benefits that we're looking to amplify.
Yeah, we think it's quite innovative. We don't know any other cities that have done anything like this. And all the other point to make is that we haven't had a chance to do this yet, but we will be promoting it to local people and creating volunteer groups. Hopefully we'll be working on it. So we have 2 community nature community engagement officers as part of Nature City Norwich. So these are the kind of projects that they'll be able to take on from me, develop more closely with the community. Now we've got them started, both this and we're looking at friends of Heartsease, because that doesn't really exist anymore. There's a couple of groups there that work on community gardens, but nothing's really cemented. So that's our future plans.
Great. And
Councillor Bolton.
You mentioned at the start that there was no capital, so I was interested
in the Nature City Norwich project.
So this is a separate thing from the Nature City Norwich project. The go backdoor garden stuff. It's not.
This is the pilot that we started before Nature City Norwich came along, but we can incorporate that in into our work. And
So it's happening within Norwich, so it was within the scope.
Yeah.
But so the 3-year scale of the project is all just plan, and none of that is to do with action. It's that you're taking action alongside it because you can see there's something to benefit it.
So
yeah, so we've got 3. Do you want to do it?
yes, can I take that one?
You do it.
Thank you. So the output of the project is to have a pipeline of deliverable nature projects.
And those deliveries will start happening during the project, not wait.
They can do at any point. We wrap all of this into it. It's actually a really kind of quite a fluid thing. Yes, they can happen during it, but the project also aims to find new funding solutions for nature recovery, such as really getting into the detail of biodiversity net gain. But there are other funding solutions, environment, social and governance funding, for example, Aviva funding the purchase of Sweetbriar marshes. So that's a really significant chunk of work, which is, here's a pipeline of projects, how do we fund them? And all of those things, over the next 3 years, yes, but they are happening now as well and will be incorporated.
We've also got Councillor Padder with a question.
Thank you. So this is great. I think this is really good work, excellent work. It kind of mirrors the stuff that I'm doing in the marine environment at the moment, kind of building in nature-based solutions into marine planning and licensing. And what I about 6 months ago, I was in the process of drafting an email to you because I'd been to a parliamentary event with Rewilding Britain. They hosted, and we were talking about, they had a few MPs give talks about innovating licensing and planning systems to be able to incorporate nature-based solutions, etc. And so, so I haven't hit send on the email yet, but I will do. But
it's in your drafts.
The other, so that's with the organisation is Rewilding Britain.
Okay.
You probably already heard of them. The other issue I really wanted to mention was in the environment improvement plan, which was published a few days ago, I believe. There's recognition that, I'm going to say it, minoritized communities aren't engaging in green and blue spaces, and it's a real problem. I just had some survey results. I launched a survey a few months ago to understand experiences of racism in the blue environment, and I've got the results back off that. And so far, the results are demonstrating 100% experiences of racism in the blue environment. I imagine it's quite similar in the green environment.
Yeah.
So I think it's something to be aware of.
Thank you.
I think it needs to be pulled out. And I think it does need highlighting, because on one hand we're pushing for biodiversity in our blue and green spaces, but then when you look at the decision-making table, it's not representative, and you want to, what's the expression? You want to be this change you want to see something. It's a Gandhi expression, and I feel like that's really important, and there is funding in this space because it is such an important and necessary issue that needs addressing, particularly given the racial tensions we're experiencing at the moment. There's got to be a pathway to unite people, and I think this is the route to do it, and I really believe that. So anyway, I just wanted to flag that. Thank you.
Send me the email. Yes, thank you.
Just to let you know, we have a steering group for the project with the partners, and we are intending to have 2 community members on that, and we are taking it quite slowly because we're working through an inclusive process for engaging with those 2 community members. So it's not something that we've really worked with before. So we're talking to a lot of experts on what the best way of doing that is, what the process should be, what the interview should be like, what the expectations are around accessing it, for example. So if you've got anything to add, that'd be great. but also be assured that we are thinking that through. We're not just jumping into how sort of the usual kind of rules apply. We're trying to take a broader approach to that so we get it right.
If I may, I know there's further questions, and I've got further questions, but we're running very short on time. And if it's okay, Jane, maybe we can contact you directly with any further questions. Yeah. Okay, so we'll have to shelve those just for now, I think, just because otherwise we will run out of time. And I'll hand back to Phil.
Quick. I'm sure it's this and not me. With our low carbon heat network development, we've been working with DESNZ since 2022 to understand the potential for essentially replacing gas across certain parts of the city initially with low carbon heat, which essentially means heat pumps for the most part. The picture on the left there, that is a city scale air source heat pump. And the one on the right is Bristol's river source heat pump. We're still considering heat sources, and that's what the next part of this study will look at. But this is low carbon heat. The reason it's low carbon is those two great big heat generators use grid electricity, and our grid is decarbonising very quickly due to wind and solar development. And I think last year about 55 or 60% of all energy generated in the UK was renewable. So we're on a fantastic trajectory to have a net zero grid by 2035. This is probably the only slide I've got time to show you. But the study has centred, and these are pipe runs along streets that have all been costed, and the heat network is planned to supply the East Norwich strategic redevelopment area, the city centre, where we've got lots of public sector and heritage buildings that are very hard to treat in any other way. We've got a south and a north cluster. I won't go into much detail there. We've then got a joining run in the light blue, which picks up the Julian Hospital just off of Derham Road. And that makes viable a pipe run to Norwich Research Park, and picks up the UEA and the Norfolk and Norwich Hospital and other campuses such as the John Innes Centre there. And I'll just summarise by saying that, you know, this is really significant potential to reduce gas usage in Norwich. For the city centre scheme, east, north and south, we're looking at about 80 or 90 million pounds worth of investment, and a similar amount for the UEA cluster. So it's a big project, and the money that we've just won funding for, what that will do, it will enable us to do to produce an investment prospectus. We will go and speak to all of the heat off takers. The UEA we met recently will meet with the hospital and reconfirm their interest in buying heat from this scheme to meet their net zero targets. And we'll do various other pieces of work that take a lot of the risk out of the development for a potential investor. And we're about to do what we would call a soft market test. We're about to invite all of the investors, developers and operators of heat networks in the UK to Norwich and tell them about our evolving plans and seek to win their support to invest the scheme. So I think it's likely to be a year's worth of work to get to that point, but in about a year's time, we could well be in the position of having an investor decide to spend that kind of money in the city to help us decarbonise, and most likely a phasing of schemes, and that's what we'll work through in this next piece of work. But we just thought it'd be good to update you on one of our larger, our largest infrastructure projects, and just demonstrate the kind of ambition and kind of big thinking that we're taking to meet the city's decarbonisation requirements. So I had a few more slides, but I'll save you them because we've been talking about other stuff too. So with your permission, I'll probably stop there, Chair, if that's okay.
No, of course. Thank you so much. Thank you to everyone. That's been a most informative meeting, and thank you for all the councillors for all your due diligence and interest. So we'll call this meeting to a close. And if any councillors do have any further questions, maybe we can
bring them into a single kind of format so
Yeah.
that we can rather
run
than-
through them.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay. Well, thank you all, and have a good evening.
Thank you for your time and attention. Really appreciate it.